The August heat pressed down on Fair Hollow like a hand over a dying mouth. Sarah Whitmore stepped from the carriage, her silk dress already clinging to her skin, and studied the plantation house that would be her prison for the summer. 3 stories of whitewashed wood rose against the Carolina sky, surrounded by fields that stretched to the tree line like an ocean of green misery. "Ma'am, please watch your step." The driver offered his hand, his eyes avoiding hers in that particular way white men had when they spoke to women they considered above their station but beneath their respect. Sarah ignored him and focused instead on the figures moving between the cotton rows, dark bodies bent low, hands working rhythms old as time itself. Her uncle, Charles Whitmore, had written that Fair Hollow was the finest plantation in Charleston County. He had not mentioned that it felt like standing at the edge of a grave. "The master is expecting you in the drawing room," said a house servant who appeared at her elbow. The woman was perhaps 40, with iron-grey hair wrapped tight beneath a red headscarf and eyes that seemed to look through Sarah rather than at her. "I'm Ruth. I'll see to your belongings. Thank you." Sarah meant it, though she knew gratitude from a white woman meant little here. The journey was long. Long journeys end badly at Fair Hollow. Ruth's voice was flat, matter-of-fact, as if she'd commented on the weather. Then she was gone, moving toward the carriage with efficiency born of fear. The drawing room smelled of tobacco and rotting magnolias. Charles Whitmore sat in a leather chair that had seen better decades, his face flushed with the particular ruddiness of men who drank their breakfast. Tell me in the comments which country you are from and what you thought of this story. And if this story made an impression on you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future stories. At 47, he looked 60, jowls sagging, eyes yellowed at the edges, hands trembling slightly as he poured brandy from a crystal decanter. "Sarah, my dear niece." His smile revealed teeth stained brown. "Welcome to Fair Hollow. Your mother wrote that you needed country air to recover your nerves. Well, we have air aplenty here, though I can't promise it's good for much." Uncle Charles. Sarah kept her voice neutral, though something about the room made her skin crawl. Portraits lined the walls, 4 men in varying stages of pompous self-regard, all dead according to her mother's letters. The 5th frame held only a mirror, reflecting Charles's bloated face. "Mother was concerned about my melancholy. She thought a change of scenery might help." "Melancholy?" Charles laughed, a wet sound like something drowning. "That's what they're calling it now. When I was young, we called it hysteria and married it off quick. But times change, don't they? Even here, where nothing ever really changes at all." He drank deeply, and Sarah noticed his hand shook harder after he swallowed. "The house is beautiful," she lied. "The house is cursed." Charles said it lightly, as if discussing the price of cotton. 5 masters in 20 years, all dead before 50. My predecessors, Philip Gentry, William Ashford, Thomas Brennan, and James Collinsworth. Good men, mostly. Dead men, certainly. The locals say Fair Hollow eats its owners. I'm starting to believe them. Surely that's superstition. Everything south of Charleston is superstition, my dear. Doesn't make it less true. He gestured toward the window overlooking the yard. "You see that well? The old stone one by the kitchen house?" Sarah moved to the window. The well stood in a patch of packed earth, surrounded by herbs that grew wild and untended. A woman knelt beside it, drawing water with a wooden bucket. Even from this distance, Sarah could see she was older than the other slaves, her movements precise and ritualistic, as if she performed a ceremony rather than a chore. "That's Dinah," Charles said. "Been here longer than anyone can remember. Came from the Gold Coast as a girl, they say, though no one knows exactly when. She draws all the household water, won't let anyone else near that well. Says the water knows her hands. That's peculiar." Peculiar is one word for it. Charles finished his brandy and immediately poured another. The previous masters, they all drank Dinah's water, every one of them, and every one of them died with their insides turned black, rotting from within like fruit left too long in the sun. Doctors called it fever, called it consumption, called it swamp sickness, called it everything except what it was. And what was it? Charles looked at her then, really looked at her, and Sarah saw genuine fear in his yellowed eyes. Judgment. Now, before Sarah could respond, Ruth appeared in the doorway. "Dinner will be ready within the hour, Master Whitmore. I've prepared the blue room for Miss Sarah." "Good, good." Charles waved her away, but his attention had already drifted back to the window, back to Dinah at the well. Sarah's room was on the second floor, overlooking the same yard as the drawing room. The blue wallpaper had faded to grey, and the furniture carried the musty smell of disuse, but the bed was made with clean linens, and someone had placed fresh flowers, oleander, she noticed with a chill, on the bedside table. As Ruth unpacked her trunk, Sarah stood at the window, watching Dinah work. The woman moved with the efficiency of long practice, drawing bucket after bucket, her lips moving in what might have been prayer or conversation. With whom Sarah couldn't imagine. "She talks to the water," Ruth said quietly, startling Sarah. The older woman had come to stand beside her, her eyes on Dinah below. "Has done since before I came here, and I've been at Fair Hollow 30 years. Some say she's mad. Others say she's something worse. What do you say?" Ruth was quiet for a long moment. "I say there's things in this world older than Christ and meaner than the devil. I say Dinah remembers them all, and I say you shouldn't drink the well water, Miss Sarah. Not even a sip. That's ridiculous. It's just water. Nothing at Fair Hollow is just anything." Ruth turned away from the window, her face carefully blank. "Dinner's at 7. Master Whitmore likes his guests punctual." After Ruth left, Sarah remained at the window until the sun began to set, painting the sky the color of old blood. Dinah drew one final bucket, lifted it to her lips, and drank deeply. Even from this distance, Sarah could see her smile, an expression of such profound satisfaction that it made Sarah's breath catch. Then Dinah looked up directly at Sarah's window, and for a moment their eyes met across the dying light. The old woman's face held no malice, no anger, no hatred, only patience. The kind of patience that could wait 20 years, or 40, or 100. The kind of patience that could poison 5 men and wait for the 6th. That night, Sarah dreamed of water. Dark water, deep water, water that tasted of earth and iron, and something else she couldn't name. She dreamed of hands pulling her down, down into depths that had no bottom, while a woman's voice sang in a language Sarah had never heard, but somehow understood. The ground remembers, the water remembers, and revenge is a bucket drawn slow. She woke, gasping, her nightgown soaked with sweat, to find a glass of water on her bedside table. Crystal clear, cold as winter, beading with condensation in the hot night air. She hadn't requested it. Ruth hadn't mentioned bringing it. Sarah stared at the glass for a long time, her throat burning with thirst, Charles's words echoing in her mind. They all drank Dinah's water, every one of them. She didn't touch it, but as she lay back down, trying to slow her racing heart, she heard something that made her blood freeze. From somewhere below, echoing up through the old house's bones, came the sound of a bucket being drawn from a well. Slow, rhythmic, inevitable. And beneath that sound, so faint she might have imagined it, a woman's laughter, dark as the water itself. Morning came to Fair Hollow like a fever breaking, hot, sudden, and tinged with the smell of something rotting. Sarah woke to find the glass of water still on her bedside table, now room temperature, and filmed with a thin layer of dust that shouldn't have formed overnight. She dressed quickly, her hands shaking slightly as she fastened the buttons of her cotton day dress. The dining room was empty except for Charles, who sat hunched over a plate of untouched eggs, his face the color of old cheese. A pitcher of water sat sweating in the center of the table, and Sarah noticed his cup was full, the liquid inside dark and cloudy. "You look unwell, Uncle." Sarah took her seat, carefully avoiding the pitcher. "I am unwell." Charles's voice was hoarse, as if he'd spent the night screaming. "Dreamed of drowning. Dreamed I was at the bottom of the well, looking up through 20 feet of water, watching faces stare down at me. 5 faces. The men who owned this place before me." He laughed to sound like breaking glass. "Funny thing is, I could breathe down there. The water wanted me alive. Perhaps you should see a doctor. Doctors can't help what's wrong with me." He pushed his cup away, finally meeting her eyes. "You didn't drink the water I had Ruth bring you, did you?" Sarah's stomach clenched. "No." "Good, good." Charles wiped his mouth with a trembling hand. "I stopped drinking it 3 days ago. Switched to rainwater we collect in barrels. But I can still taste it, that metallic tang, like sucking on old coins. It's in my mouth when I wake, in my throat when I swallow. The well water wants back in. Uncle, you're frightening me. I'm frightening myself." He stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "Come with me. There's something you need to see." He led her through the house and out the back door, past the kitchen house where the morning cooking fires burned. The enslaved workers moved silently around them, eyes downcast, as if Charles and Sarah were ghosts they'd learned not to acknowledge. Dinah was already at the well, drawing water for the day's needs, her wooden bucket rising and falling with mechanical precision. "Dinah!" Charles called out. "A word!" The old woman turned slowly, bucket still in hand. Up close, Sarah could see she was ancient, skin like worn leather, eyes milky with cataracts that somehow still saw everything. She wore the same rough cotton dress as the other enslaved women, but around her neck hung a carved wooden pendant that seemed to writhe in the morning light, its symbols hurting Sarah's eyes when she tried to focus on them. "Master Whitmore." Dinah's voice was surprisingly strong, rich with an accent Sarah couldn't place. "Miss Sarah, beautiful morning for drawing water. The well is generous today." "I want you to stay away from this well," Charles said, his voice cracking with false authority. "I'm assigning someone else to draw the household water." Dinah smiled, revealing teeth filed to points in a pattern Sarah had seen once in a medical text about African tribal customs. "You can assign whoever pleases you, master, but the well knows my hands. It won't give water sweet to anyone else. You'll see." "That's superstitious nonsense." "Is it?" Dinah set down her bucket and approached them with slow, deliberate steps. Sarah fought the urge to back away. "5 masters have drunk from this well. 5 masters have died with their bellies turned to rot and their blood thick as tar. You're the 6th, Master Whitmore, and you've been drinking for 6 months now. How do you feel?" Charles's face flushed purple. "How dare you?" "I dare because I'm already damned." Dinah's smile widened. "Been damned since they dragged me from my mother's village, since they threw me in the ship's hold, where half of us died in our own filth, since they sold me like cattle to Philip Gentry himself. First master, cruel man, liked to use his fists on women who couldn't fight back." Sarah felt her breath catch. Charles had gone very still. "I was 14, Dinah continued, her voice flat and terrible. "He came to my cabin that first night. Held me down while I screamed for gods who were an ocean away. When he finished, he told me I belonged to him now. Body and soul." She touched the pendant at her throat. "But my grandmother, she taught me things before I was taken. Taught me that water remembers, that earth keeps count, that poison is just medicine used with patience." "You're confessing to murder," Charles whispered. "I'm confessing to justice." Dinah turned back to the well, trailing one hand along its stone rim. "Philip Gentry drank my water for 2 years before the fever took him. William Ashford lasted 18 months. He was younger, stronger. Thomas Brennan, that pious hypocrite who preached salvation on Sundays and raped his kitchen girl on Mondays. He lasted 3 years. I made it slow for him, made him suffer the way he made her suffer." Sarah's mind reeled. The fourth master, James Collinsworth, quickest death of all, 6 months. He beat a man to death for breaking a plough, beat him right here in this yard while we all watched. I made his water strong after that. Very strong. Dinah lifted her bucket again, and Sarah saw something moving in the liquid. Shadows that had no source, shapes that twisted like drowning hands. The well takes what I give it, herbs from the woods, roots from the swamp, words from the old language, and it gives back death. Sweet, slow death that looks like fever or consumption or God's will. Why are you telling us this? Sarah found her voice, though it shook. Why confess now? Dinah looked at her then, really looked at her, and Sarah saw something ancient and pitiless in those clouded eyes. Because Master Whitmore has been drinking rainwater for 3 days now. And because it won't matter, the well got inside him months ago. It's in his blood, in his bones, growing like roots through his body. He's already dead, just doesn't know it yet. Charles made a strangled sound and lunged for Dinah, but his legs gave out halfway, sending him crashing to the packed earth. He convulsed once, twice, black fluid leaking from his mouth and nose. Sarah screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. "Uncle! Someone help! Please!" But the enslaved workers who had gathered kept their distance, watching with expressions that ranged from fear to satisfaction. Ruth appeared from the kitchen house, took one look at Charles's thrashing form, and shook her head slowly. "Too late," she said quietly. "Been too late since his first cup." Charles's eyes rolled back, his body arching in a final spasm, and then he went still. The black fluid pooled beneath his head, soaking into the thirsty ground. In the sudden silence, Sarah heard Dinah's bucket being lowered back into the well, the rope creaking like old laughter. 6 masters, Dinah said softly, pouring the fresh water onto the earth beside Charles's body. 6 souls the ground has swallowed. Now it's full. Now it can rest. Sarah looked up at her, tears streaming down her face. "You're a murderer. I'll see you hanged. Will you?" Dinah tilted her head, curious. "Who will you tell? The magistrate who owns 3 plantations and drinks from his own well, the sheriff who bought his position by promising to keep the enslaved in line. They won't believe a white woman defending a slave over her own uncle, and even if they did," she gestured to the gathered workers, "who here will testify?" Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. "We all saw Master Whitmore collapse from fever," Ruth said finally, her voice carrying across the yard. "Tragic. But not uncommon in the Carolina heat, isn't that right?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sarah felt the world tilting beneath her, felt the terrible weight of complicity settling on her shoulders. "You're all protecting her," she whispered. "We're protecting ourselves," Ruth replied. "Dinah did what needed doing. 5 monsters dead, and Fair Hollow's blood debt paid. If that's murder, then we're all guilty, and we'll all go to hell together before we let them hang her alone." Dinah knelt beside Charles' body, her old joints cracking. She dipped her fingers in the black fluid that had poured from his mouth and drew symbols on the earth. The same symbols Sarah had glimpsed on her pendant. Ancient marks that seemed to sink into the ground like water into sand. "The earth remembers," Dinah whispered. "It remembers every drop of our blood, every tear, every scream in the night. The masters thought they owned us, but we're all owned by the ground in the end. And the ground keeps better count than any overseer's ledger." She stood, her shadow falling across Sarah like a judgment. "You can stay at Fair Hollow if you like, Miss Sarah. The house needs a mistress, but you'll drink what we all drink, rainwater and well water mixed the way it's always been. And you'll remember that this land has teeth. It bites those who forget." Sarah wanted to run, wanted to scream, wanted to do anything but kneel in the dirt beside her uncle's corpse while a confessed murderer walked free. But she couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only watch as Dinah returned to the well, bucket in hand, humming a tune that sounded like drowning. That afternoon, they buried Charles in the family plot beside the 4 masters who had come before him. The preacher said words about God's mysterious ways and the trials of the righteous. Sarah stood dry-eyed through it all, feeling the weight of eyes on her back, enslaved workers watching from a distance, waiting to see what the new mistress would do. After the funeral, Sarah locked herself in the blue room and stared at the glass of water on her bedside table. It had been refreshed sometime during the burial, the liquid inside crystal clear and cold. She picked it up, studying it in the afternoon light. It looked perfectly ordinary, perfectly safe. But when she held it to her ear, she swore she could hear something, a whisper, soft and insistent, speaking in a language she didn't understand, but her body recognized. The language of thirst, of need, of slow poison disguised as mercy. Sarah set the glass down without drinking and moved to the window. Below, Dinah drew water as the sun began its descent, her bucket rising and falling with the rhythm of a heartbeat, or a death rattle. That night, Sarah dreamed of drowning again. But this time, she wasn't alone in the depths. 5 men floated beside her, their faces bloated and black, their mouths open in silent screams. And beneath them all, sinking deeper into darkness, she saw herself. When she woke, gasping and sick, the glass of water was at her lips, and she was drinking deeply before she even realized what she'd done. The liquid slid down her throat like silk, like iron, like coming home to a place she'd never been. It tasted of earth and endings, and somewhere far below she heard the well whisper her name. 7, it seemed to say, 7 souls to balance the scales. And in the darkness, Dinah smiled. Sarah spent 3 days trying to leave Fair Hollow. On the first day, she ordered the carriage prepared, only to find both horses had thrown shoes and gone lame overnight. A strange occurrence, the stable hand said, shaking his head with poorly concealed amusement. On the second day, she tried to walk the 7 miles to Charleston, but made it only to the property line before her legs gave out. A terrible weakness flooding through her body that felt like drowning on dry land. On the third day, she stopped trying and accepted what her body had known since that first sip. The well water had her now, and it wasn't letting go. "You look poorly, Miss Sarah." Ruth brought breakfast to her room, cornbread and ham, and a tall glass of water that seemed to glow in the morning light. "Should eat something. Keep your strength up." "I don't want it." Sarah's voice was weak, her throat burning with thirst she couldn't name. "Take it away." "Can't do that." Ruth set the tray down firmly. "You need water in this heat, especially well water. It's the sweetest in the county. It's poisoned. It's honest." Ruth moved to the window, looking down at Dinah's small cabin near the well. "More honest than anything else at Fair Hollow. Poison for poisoners, but regular folks drink it fine. The well knows the difference." Sarah forced herself to sit up, though the effort made her head swim. "How long have you known what Dinah was doing?" "Known?" Ruth smiled without humor. "I helped, Miss Sarah. We all did. Someone had to gather the herbs from the swamp, deathbell and widow's breath, ghost root and shadow vine. Plants with no English names, plants the Cherokee won't touch. Dinah told us what to find, taught us how to harvest without dying ourselves. Then she'd take them down to the well at midnight and do her work." "Her work," Sarah repeated numbly. "You mean murder?" "I mean justice. You think God dispenses justice to people like us? You think the law cares when a master beats a man to death or rapes a girl or sells a mother's children to different plantations just to watch her break?" Ruth's voice hardened. "We take care of our own, Miss Sarah. Always have. And when one of us has power, real power, the kind that comes from the old places, we use it." Sarah looked at the glass of water, condensation beading on its surface like tears. "What's in it? What's Dinah doing to me?" "Opening you." Ruth came to sit on the edge of the bed, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "The well water, it shows you things, truth things. Makes you see Fair Hollow the way we see it. Not a plantation, but a graveyard with a house on top. Not a business, but a crime that's been happening for 100 years. She met Sarah's eyes. "Question is, what will you do with the seeing?" Before Sarah could answer, a scream tore through the morning air. High, terrified, unmistakably male. Both women rushed to the window to see one of the field overseers, a brutal man named Talbot, thrashing in the yard. His skin had gone dark, almost black, veins standing out like roots beneath the surface. Black fluid poured from his mouth, nose, and ears as he convulsed in the dust. "Dear God," Sarah whispered. "God's got nothing to do with it." Ruth's voice was flat. "Talbot's been drinking from the well again. Dinah told him to stop a month ago, told him the water didn't want him anymore. But he's a stubborn man, cruel too. Whipped a boy near to death last week for looking at him wrong." They watched in horrified silence as Talbot's convulsions slowed, then stopped. The enslaved workers who had gathered made no move to help him. Even the white overseers hung back, as if afraid of whatever sickness had claimed him. Dinah emerged from her cabin, bucket in hand, and approached the body with slow, ceremonial steps. She knelt beside Talbot, dipped her fingers in the black fluid, and drew symbols on his forehead, the same marks Sarah had seen her make over Charles's corpse. "The well keeps better books than any overseer," Dinah said, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. "It remembers every lash, every rape, every child sold away. And when the debt gets too high," she gestured to Talbot's body, "the well collects." One of the white overseers, a young man named Pritchard, stepped forward with trembling courage. "You can't just kill people. There are laws." "Laws?" Dinah turned to face him, and even from the window Sarah could see the terrible amusement in her eyes. "You mean the laws that say I'm property? That say my children can be sold like cattle? That say a white man can do anything he wants to my body and face no consequence?" She laughed, a sound like bones breaking. "Those laws, Mr. Pritchard? Because if we're following those laws, then everything I've done is just damaged property destroying its owners, and damaged property can't be held accountable, can it?" Pritchard backed away, his face pale. No one else spoke. No one else moved. Sarah felt something shift inside her, like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. The water she'd drunk was working through her system, and with it came a clarity that was almost painful. She saw Fair Hollow as it truly was. Not a grand plantation, but a machine designed to break human beings into tools. Every white-painted board, every cotton bloom, every acre of cleared land was built on screaming, on blood, on the slow grinding of souls into profit. And the well was the only thing that kept count. "I need to talk to her," Sarah said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "To Dinah. Now." Ruth studied her for a long moment. "You sure? Once you talk to her proper, there's no going back. The seeing becomes permanent. I'm already changed. I can feel it." Sarah looked down at her hands, half expecting to see black veins crawling beneath the skin. "The water's done something to me. I need to understand what." They found Dinah at the well, washing Talbot's blood from her hands, with water that ran clear, despite the darkness it was cleaning. Up close, Sarah could see that the old woman's pendant was actually carved from bone, human bone, etched with symbols that seemed to move when Sarah wasn't looking directly at them. "Miss Sarah." Dinah didn't look up from her washing. "Come to condemn me? Call the magistrate? Have me hanged for practicing the only justice available to me?" "No." Sarah surprised herself with the answer. "I came to understand. The water you've been giving me, what's it doing?" "Opening your eyes, making you see with more than the flesh." Dinah finally looked up, her cataract-clouded eyes somehow piercing Sarah to the core. "You're wondering why you can't leave, why your body betrays you at the property line, why you dream of drowning?" "Yes. Because you drank the truth, and truth is poison to pretty lies." Dinah stood, her old joints crackling. "Fair Hollow doesn't want to let you go. Not yet. It needs a witness who can see both sides, the pretty white house and the screaming beneath it, the cotton fields and the blood that feeds them, the profit and the price." Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. "I never wanted this. I never asked to be part of this. None of us asked for what we got." Ruth had followed them, standing at Sarah's shoulder like a guardian or a guard. But here we all are. Question is what you'll do with it. The well water, Sarah pressed. Is it killing me too? Dinah considered this. That depends on what you do next. The water judges, Miss Sarah. It weighs what you've taken against what you've given. Your uncle, those other masters, Talbot, they took everything and gave nothing but pain. The scales tipped, the well collected, but you, she tilted her head, studying Sarah like a peculiar specimen. You haven't decided yet what kind of person you'll be, so the well is waiting, watching, keeping you here until you choose. Choose what? Whether to be human or master, whether to see us as people or property, whether to help break this evil machine or become another cog in it. Dinah stepped closer, her breath smelling of earth and iron. The water's in you now. It'll show you things, visions of what Fair Hollow's done, who it's destroyed, how many souls are ground into this dirt. And when you've seen it all, really seen it, you'll have to decide. Help us survive, or join the masters in their graves. Sarah's mind reeled. You're asking me to betray my own people. Your people? Ruth's voice cut like a knife. Your people dragged us across an ocean. Your people worked us to death and called it prosperity. Your people rape our daughters and call it their right. Maybe it's time you chose better people, Miss Sarah. That night, the visions started in earnest. Sarah lay in her bed, unable to sleep, and saw Fair Hollow's history play across her closed eyelids like a lantern show in hell. She saw Philip Gentry, the first master, beating a man to death with a shovel for the crime of exhaustion. Saw William Ashford selling a woman's children to a trader while she screamed and pleaded. Saw Thomas Brennan forcing himself on girl after girl in the slave quarters, leaving broken bodies and shattered minds in his wake. Saw James Collinsworth presiding over Sunday services, preaching salvation while wearing a shirt stained with yesterday's whipping blood. And she saw Dinah through it all, younger each time, her face less weathered, her eyes not yet clouded. Saw her gathering herbs by moonlight, grinding them in her wooden bowl, whispering prayers in a language that predated Christ. Saw her pouring the mixtures into the well, one careful dose at a time, building poison like a mason building a house. One stone, one cup, one death at a time. The visions showed her something else too. The other enslaved workers living their impossible lives. Mothers who sang lullabies to children they'd never see grow up. Men who maintained their dignity in the face of constant degradation. Women who found small moments of joy in the crushing machinery of bondage. People who remained human despite everything designed to break them. By the time the sun rose, Sarah was weeping, for them, for herself, for the terrible truth that she'd been born on the wrong side of an unforgivable equation. She had profited from suffering her entire life, dressed in cotton, picked by bleeding hands, fed by food grown in soil, fertilized with tears. The well water had shown her, and she couldn't unsee it. She found Dinah at dawn, already drawing the day's water, her movements as precise as a prayer. "I want to help," Sarah said without preamble. "Tell me what to do." Dinah paused, bucket halfway up from the depths. "Help. Help. How?" "However you need. I have money, connections in Charleston. I could..." "Could what?" Dinah set down the bucket with a sharp thunk. "Buy us. Free us. Save us like some benevolent angel descended from white heaven?" Her voice dripped contempt. "We don't need saving, Miss Sarah. We need the world to end. This world, anyway. The one where people own people. Where profit matters more than souls. Where Fair Hollow can exist and prosper and call itself civilization. Then help me end it," Sarah shot back. "This plantation, at least. I'm the only heir. When the will's read, Fair Hollow will be mine. I can sell it, break it up, free us to what? Starvation, the roads. We'll be arrested as runaways within a day." Ruth had appeared beside them, her face hard. "Freedom without means is just a different kind of death, Miss Sarah. You want to help, then really help. Stay here, run Fair Hollow different, pay wages, let us leave if we choose. Stop being a plantation and become something else, something that might actually redeem this blood-soaked ground. Sarah stared at them both, understanding slowly dawning. They weren't asking for charity or rescue. They were demanding partnership, accountability, change from the inside out. I don't know if I can do that, she admitted. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Then keep drinking the water, Dinah said simply. It'll make you strong enough, or it'll kill you. Either way, Fair Hollow will finally get what it deserves. Sarah looked down at the well, at its dark depths that held so much more than water. She thought of the 6 dead masters, of Talbot's blackened corpse, of the terrible justice that had been dispensed 1 cup at a time, and she thought of what Ruth had said. The well judges. All right, Sarah whispered. I'll stay. I'll try. But I need your help, both of you, all of you. I can't do this alone. For the first time since Sarah had arrived, Dinah smiled, really smiled, with something like hope brightening her ancient eyes. Then drink deep, Miss Sarah, and let the water teach you how to be worthy of the ground you walk on. That night, Sarah drank the well water without hesitation, tasting metal and earth and something older than memory. And in her dreams, the drowning men no longer screamed. They simply watched, waiting to see if she would join them in the depths or rise to the surface transformed. The well, it seemed, was patient. It had waited 20 years for justice. It could wait a little longer to see if mercy was possible. 3 weeks after Charles Whitmore's death, Sarah sat in the plantation office, surrounded by ledgers that documented Fair Hollow's operations in neat columns of profit and loss. Except the numbers told only half the story. For every bale of cotton sold, there was an invisible ledger entry, whose back was broken picking it. For every pound sterling earned, there was a cost not measured in currency, whose child was sold to pay for the master's new carriage. Sarah had been drinking the well water daily now, and with each cup, the invisible ledger became clearer. She could look at 28 bales sold, Charleston market £42 sterling, and see behind it the name Joshua, age 17, who'd worked himself to death to meet that quota. Could see house repairs £12 and know it was funded by selling a woman named Mary to a plantation in Georgia, separating her from her 3 children. The water showed her everything, and it was destroying her. You need to eat something. Ruth placed a plate of cornbread beside the ledgers, along with a glass of well water that gleamed like liquid silver in the lamplight. Been up here for 6 hours without a bite. I can't stop reading. Sarah's voice was hoarse, her eyes red from crying. Every page is another crime. Every entry is someone suffering. How did they live with themselves? They didn't think of us as people. Ruth's voice was matter-of-fact. Hard to feel guilty about hurting furniture. Besides, they had preachers telling them it was God's will, scientists telling them it was natural law, politicians telling them it was economic necessity. Easy to believe comfortable lies when believing the truth would cost you everything. Sarah looked up at her. What am I supposed to do with this? How do I fix something this broken? You can't fix it. Can only try something different. Ruth sat down across from her, hands folded on the desk. Dinah and we've been talking. Some of the others too. We have ideas, if you're willing to listen. I'm listening. Over the next hour, Ruth laid out a plan that was radical, dangerous, and possibly illegal. Convert Fair Hollow from a slave plantation to a wage labor farm. Offer the enslaved workers the choice to stay as paid employees or leave with travel money and letters of reference. Divide the land into smaller plots that could be rented or sold to black farmers. Transform the plantation house into a school, teaching reading and arithmetic to children who'd been deliberately kept ignorant. It'll ruin you financially, Ruth warned. Fair Hollow only profits because we're unpaid. Start paying wages and the whole operation becomes unsustainable. You'll be bankrupt within 2 years. Then I'll be bankrupt. Sarah surprised herself with how easily the words came. Money from slavery isn't worth having. Easy to say now, harder when you're actually poor. But Ruth smiled slightly. Still, it's the right thing. Just don't expect gratitude. Half the white folks in Charleston will call you a race traitor. The other half will call you crazy. And some of us, she gestured vaguely toward the quarters. Some of us won't trust it. We've been tricked before, promised freedom only to have it snatched away. You'll have to prove yourself, over and over. I know. Sarah closed the ledger, unable to look at the numbers anymore. But I have to try. The water won't let me do anything else. As if summoned by her words, Dinah appeared in the doorway, her shadow long in the lamplight. She'd been scarce these past weeks, spending long hours at the well or in her cabin, doing work she wouldn't explain. Now she looked tired, older than ever, but there was a lightness to her expression that Sarah had never seen before. "The sixth master is dead," Dinah said without preamble. "The debt is paid. The well can rest now." Sarah frowned. "But Uncle Charles has been dead for weeks." "Not him, Talbot." Dinah moved into the room, and Sarah saw she carried her carved bone pendant in her hands, the leather cord severed. 7 souls the well needed. 6 masters and the overseer who did their bloody work. 7 for the 7 of us who were destroyed. The first year Fair Hollow opened. 7 for 7. The scales are balanced. She set the pendant on the desk, and Sarah saw with shock that the bone had developed cracks, deep fissures running through the carved symbols like a wound healing. "I made this from my daughter's finger bone," Dinah said quietly. "She died in the crossing, thrown overboard when she got sick. I kept this piece of her, carried it through everything, used it to focus the water's power, to aim its justice. But I don't need it anymore. The work is done." Ruth reached out and took Dinah's weathered hand. "What does that mean for you?" "It means I can rest." Dinah looked between them both, her clouded eyes somehow clear. "Means the poison in the well is fading. The herbs will wash away with the next rain. The water will be just water again, clean, sweet, safe. No more judgment, no more death. Just," she took a shaky breath, "just water." Sarah felt something release in her chest, a tension she hadn't known she was carrying. "So I'm not dying? The well isn't going to kill me?" "You were never dying, not really." Dinah smiled gently. "The water was teaching you, showing you truth so harsh it felt like poison. But you kept drinking anyway, kept looking at the ugliness and not turning away. That's why you're still here. The well judged you honest. I don't feel honest. I feel complicit. You are complicit. We all are. That's the poison of this place. It makes everyone guilty, enslaved and free alike. We're all infected with Fair Hollow's evil, breathing its air, drinking its water, walking on ground soaked in tears." Dinah picked up her pendant, studying the cracks. "But infection can be survived. Guilt can be transformed into action. That's what the water was trying to teach you." She handed the pendant to Sarah, who took it with trembling fingers. The bone felt warm, almost alive, and the symbols carved into it seemed less like writing and more like veins, channels for power to flow through. "Keep it," Dinah said. "Remember what it took to balance the scales. Remember that justice sometimes looks like poison, and mercy sometimes looks like weakness, but both are necessary to survive in a world this broken." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted outside, shouting, horses, the jangle of weapons. They rushed to the window to see a group of white men dismounting in the yard, led by a heavy-set man in a sheriff's star. Behind them, bound and frightened, was Samuel, one of the field workers. "God, no!" Ruth whispered. "They found him!" "Found who? What's happening?" Sarah was already moving toward the door, but Ruth grabbed her arm. "Samuel ran 3 days ago. Tried to make it to the Free States. They must have caught him on the road." Ruth's voice was tight with fear. "They'll whip him. Maybe worse. Make an example." Sarah yanked her arm free and ran down the stairs, bursting into the yard, just as the sheriff was addressing the gathered enslaved workers, his voice loud and satisfied. This is what happens to runaways. This is what happens when property gets ideas above its station. He shoved Samuel to the ground. I'm authorized by law to administer 40 lashes, right here, right now. And if any of you get thoughts about following this boy north, you remember what you see today. No. Sarah's voice cut across the yard, surprising herself with its authority. You're on my property. I don't authorize any punishment. The sheriff turned, his face registering surprise, then contempt. You must be the Whitmore niece. Sorry for your loss, ma'am, but this is legal business. I've got authority from the Fugitive Slave Act itself. Samuel belongs to this plantation. His discipline is my concern, not yours. Sarah forced herself to walk calmly toward the sheriff, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Release him. I'll deal with this internally. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. That's not how this works. We caught him on the Charleston Road with a stolen horse and forged papers. He's broken multiple laws. He will be punished. Then take it up with the magistrate tomorrow. In the meantime, he's my property, and I don't consent to his destruction. Sarah let the ugly word, property, sit heavy between them, using the law's own language as a weapon. The sheriff looked at her for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Around them, the enslaved workers had gone utterly still, watching this confrontation with an intensity that made the air feel charged, electric. Finally, the sheriff spat in the dirt. Fine. But understand this, Miss Whitmore. Word is you've been making changes here at Fair Hollow. Soft changes, dangerous changes. People are talking about you coddling the darkies, treating them like humans instead of stock. He leaned closer, his breath sour with tobacco. You keep going this way, and there'll be consequences. Maybe not from the law, but from your neighbors who understand what's necessary to keep order in this country. Is that a threat? It's friendly advice, from folks who've lived in Carolina longer than you, who understand how things work here. He mounted his horse, signaling his men to follow. You're a woman alone on a plantation full of slaves who've got no reason to love you. Be careful, Miss Whitmore. Be very careful. They rode out in a cloud of dust, leaving Samuel collapsed in the dirt, his wrists bloody from the ropes. Sarah knelt beside him, helping him sit up, aware of every eye on her. Are you hurt? Did they? I'm alive. Samuel's voice was barely a whisper. That's more than I expected. Ruth and Dinah helped carry Samuel to the infirmary, a small building behind the kitchen house where the enslaved workers tended their own sick. Sarah followed, ignoring the stares, the whispered conversations, the weight of judgment from all sides. While Ruth cleaned Samuel's wounds, Sarah stood by the window, watching the sun set over Fair Hollow's fields. The cotton was ready for harvest, white bowls gleaming against green leaves, beautiful if you didn't think about the labor that had grown them. Profit waiting to be extracted from human suffering, just like every year before. He'll try again, Ruth said quietly, bandaging Samuel's wrists. Samuel, he'll run again as soon as he can. You know that, right? I know. Sarah turned to look at the young man on the cot, his face set with stubborn determination, despite his exhaustion. Samuel, if I gave you papers, real papers, manumission documents, would you go north? Everyone in the room went still. You can't, Dinah said. The neighbors, the sheriff, they're watching now. You free one, they'll demand to know why. Demand to know if you're freeing them all. And if you say no, then I'll say yes. Sarah heard herself say it, heard the words come out with a certainty that surprised her. I'll free everyone, all of you. I'll liquidate Fair Hollow's assets, divide the proceeds, and give you all the choice to stay or go. That's suicide, Ruth said flatly. Social suicide, financial suicide, maybe actual suicide, if your neighbors decide to make an example of you. Maybe. Sarah looked down at the bone pendant still clutched in her hand, at the cracks running through it like the fissures in her old life. But I've been drinking the water. I've seen what Fair Hollow really is. I can't pretend anymore. Can't participate in this horror and call myself human. She looked at Samuel, at Ruth, at Dinah. I'm not offering rescue. I'm offering partnership. Stay and help me transform this place into something that isn't monstrous. Or take your freedom and go build better lives somewhere this evil hasn't touched. Either way, I won't be a master anymore. I can't. Samuel pushed himself upright, wincing at the pain. You mean this? You're really freeing us? I need time to make it legal, to get the papers drawn up right so they can't be contested. But yes, I mean it. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Samuel started laughing, a sound like something breaking and healing at the same time. Lord have mercy, the well water really did change you. The well water showed me the truth. I changed myself. Sarah moved to the window, looking out at Fair Hollow's fields, its quarters, its beautiful poisoned heart. And now I'm going to change this place, or die trying. Behind her, Dinah whispered something in that old language, the one with no English name. A prayer, maybe, or a benediction, or just acknowledgement that something impossible had begun. Transformation born from poison, mercy growing in soil fertilized with justice. Outside, the well sat silent in the gathering dark, its water finally clean, its long work done. 7 souls for 7 souls. The debt paid, the scales balanced, the ground finally satisfied. But Fair Hollow's story wasn't over. It was just beginning, and this time it would be written by different hands. The magistrate's office smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper, legal documents piled on every surface like sediment from decades of certified injustice. Magistrate William Pembroke was a heavy man with the particular smugness that came from inheriting power and confusing it with virtue. He looked at the manumission papers Sarah had laid before him, as if she'd presented him with a dead rat. Miss Whitmore, I cannot in good conscience approve this. He pushed the papers back across his desk. You're proposing to free 47 individuals. That's a fortune in assets, simply given away. They're not assets, they're people. Sarah kept her voice level, though the well water still coursing through her system made her want to scream the truth at him until his comfortable world cracked. And I'm within my legal rights to manumit my own property. Technically, yes, but rights must be exercised with wisdom. Pembroke leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. You're a young woman, recently bereaved, clearly not thinking rationally. This decision will impoverish you. It will also create difficulties for your neighbors who must maintain proper discipline on their own holdings. My financial situation is my concern. As for my neighbors, your neighbors, Pembroke interrupted, are the backbone of this colony. Their plantations produce wealth that benefits everyone. What you're proposing threatens that prosperity. 47 freed coloreds wandering the roads, spreading ideas about liberty and rights. Do you understand what that could inspire? Hope, Sarah suggested coldly. Pembroke's face flushed. Rebellion, chaos, the destruction of our entire way of life. He stood, signaling the meeting's end. I won't approve these papers. Not today, not next month. For your own protection, Miss Whitmore, and for the protection of civilized society. Sarah left the office feeling the weight of what she'd known but hadn't wanted to believe. The law wouldn't help her. The law was designed to prevent exactly what she was trying to do. Freedom for the enslaved wasn't a transaction the law was built to accommodate. It was a threat the law was built to suppress. She was halfway back to Fair Hollow when she noticed the riders following her. 3 men keeping a careful distance, their faces hidden by wide-brimmed hats. The sheriff's warning echoed in her mind. Maybe not from the law, but from your neighbors. Sarah urged her horse faster, but the riders matched her pace. They weren't trying to hide anymore. They were making a point. She made it back to Fair Hollow as the sun was setting, her heart hammering. The riders stopped at the property line, watching as she disappeared up the drive. A silent promise that this wasn't over. Ruth met her at the house, took one look at her face and said, "Didn't go well." Pembroke refused to approve the papers. and I was followed on the way back. Sarah dismounted, her legs shaky. I think they're going to make a move, the neighbors, I mean, force me to sell or abandon Fair Hollow. Or worse. Dinah appeared from the kitchen house, moving faster than Sarah had ever seen her move. Just got word from the Hendricks place down the road. They're holding a gathering tonight, all the local planters, discussing the problem at Fair Hollow. Let them discuss. I own this land legally. Legal ownership didn't save the Quaker family who tried freeing their slaves in 28, Ruth said quietly. Their barn burned, then their house. They left South Carolina with nothing but their lives, and barely that. Sarah felt cold despite the evening heat. They'd really do that? Destroy Fair Hollow just to stop me? They'd do worse. Dinah's eyes were grave. This isn't just about you, Miss Sarah. It's about every enslaved person in Carolina. If you succeed, if you actually free everyone here and Fair Hollow survives, it proves the whole system is unnecessary. Proves white folks can prosper without owning other people. That's more dangerous to them than any slave rebellion. Because rebellion can be crushed, Ruth added. But an alternative, a working alternative to slavery, that's an idea. And ideas spread faster than fire. Sarah looked between them, understanding dawning cold and terrible. They're going to kill me, aren't they? If they think they need to. Dinah touched Sarah's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Question is, what are you going to do about it? That night, Sarah called a meeting in the barn. Everyone from Fair Hollow, enslaved and free workers alike, the first time they'd all gathered as something other than master and property. 47 faces looked up at her in the lamplight, expressions ranging from hope to suspicion to exhausted wariness. The magistrate won't approve your freedom papers, Sarah began without preamble, and my neighbors are planning something bad. I don't know exactly what, but Ruth and Dinah think they'll try to force me out. Maybe burn the place. Silence. Then Samuel, his wrists still bandaged from his capture, spoke up. So what now? We going to fight? No, we're going to leave. Sarah had been thinking about this all evening, weighing options that all ended badly. All of us. Together. I'll liquidate what I can, gather money and supplies. We'll head north to Pennsylvania or New York. I have family connections in Philadelphia who might help. That's crazy, said Marcus, one of the older field workers. 47 black folks traveling with a white woman. We'll be stopped by every sheriff between here and Maryland, arrested, returned, maybe killed. He's right, Ruth said. Even with papers which you don't have, it's too dangerous, too visible. Then what's the alternative? Sarah felt frustration boiling up. Stay here and wait for them to burn us out? Go back to pretending this is a normal plantation? There's another option. Dinah stepped into the lamplight, and Sarah saw she'd painted her face with ash, marks that looked like the symbols from her bone pendant. We make them afraid, not of rebellion, of something older, something they won't know how to fight. What are you talking about? The water taught you truth, Miss Sarah. Now let the water teach them fear. Dinah smiled, and it was not a kind expression. Fair Hollow's reputation has kept people away for 20 years, 6 dead masters, mysterious sickness, cursed land. Let's use that. Make them believe this place is too dangerous to attack. That burning Fair Hollow would bring the curse down on their own heads. That's superstition, Sarah protested. Superstition is just power they don't understand. Ruth was nodding slowly, catching Dinah's vision. Think about it. Every planter in Carolina has heard about Fair Hollow's history, about the masters who died, about Talbot, about the well. They think this ground is poisoned. What if we prove it? Over the next hour, they hatched a plan that was equal parts theater and psychological warfare. They would stage manifestations, apparent hauntings and curses that would terrify the neighboring planters. Make Fair Hollow seem so dangerous, so supernaturally malevolent, that attacking it would feel like courting divine retribution. It's manipulation, Sarah said, troubled. It's survival, Samuel countered. They manipulate us every day with laws and whips and fear. Why can't we use fear back? Sarah looked around the barn at the faces watching her. People who'd been owned, beaten, worked to breaking, and somehow maintained their humanity. People who deserved freedom, but were being denied it by a system that called itself civilized while practicing calculated cruelty. "All right," she said finally, "let's make them afraid." The manifestations began that very night. Dinah and Ruth, working with knowledge passed down through generations, created effects that seemed impossible. Lights in the fields that moved without source, sounds from the well, voices speaking in African languages, singing songs of mourning and rage, symbols drawn in ash on the road leading to Fair Hollow, marks that made horses balk and men make warding signs. By the third night, the riders who'd been watching Fair Hollow stopped coming so close. By the fifth night, travelers were taking the long route around the property, adding miles to their journey rather than pass the cursed plantation. And then the Hendricks place burned. Sarah woke to see the sky orange with reflected flames, smelled smoke on the wind. By morning, word had spread through the county. James Hendricks' barn had caught fire in the night. His daughter had seen a figure by the blaze, a woman who looked like she was made of smoke and ash, who disappeared when they ran toward her. "We didn't do that," Sarah said, staring at Dinah in shock. "Did we?" "No." Dinah looked troubled. "But someone did, and they're letting us take the credit." Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more incidents struck neighboring plantations. A well fouled overnight, its water turned black and reeking. Livestock found dead in patterns that looked deliberate, arranged. An overseer struck blind while riding past Fair Hollow's boundary, stumbling home unable to see, babbling about a woman at a well who'd looked at him and taken his sight. "This is getting out of control," Ruth said during an emergency meeting. "Real damage is happening. People are getting hurt." "People were always getting hurt," Samuel pointed out. "Just usually us. But we didn't cause this damage. Someone else is doing it. Using our reputation as cover." Sarah looked at Dinah. "Any idea who?" Dinah shook her head slowly. "Could be other enslaved folk from neighboring plantations, seeing an opportunity. Could be poor whites who resent the planters. Could be," she hesitated, "could be the land itself. Sometimes when you break open power, you can't control where it goes." Before they could discuss further, a rider came thundering up the drive. Young Pritchard, the overseer who'd challenged Dinah over Talbot's body. He looked terrified, his horse lathered with sweat. "Miss Whitmore, there's a mob forming in Charleston. 30, maybe 40 men. They're saying Fair Hollow is practicing witchcraft, saying you're harboring a witch who's cursing the county. They're coming at dawn to burn the place and arrest everyone." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "How long do we have?" "Maybe 6 hours. Less if they ride hard." Pritchard looked at the gathered faces in the yard. "I came to warn you because I saw what Dinah did to Talbot, and I know he deserved it. Hell, I've done things here I'll answer for in the next life, but I won't be part of a lynching. Take that for what it's worth." After he rode off, silence fell over Fair Hollow like a shroud. "We need to run," Marcus said. "Now, tonight." "They'll catch us on the roads," Ruth countered. "We're too many, too slow. Then we fight." Samuel's voice was hard. "Rather die on my feet than burn like an animal." "No one's dying." Sarah surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. "And no one's running. We're going to do something they won't expect." She looked at Dinah, at Ruth, at all the faces that had come to trust her despite every reason not to. "We're going to invite them in." "What?" Multiple voices spoke at once. "Think about it. They're coming because they're afraid. Because Fair Hollow has become this mythical place of curses and evil. But what if they find something different? What if they find—" She struggled for the words. "What if they find normalcy? People living and working freely. No witchcraft, no curses, just people." "That won't stop them," Dinah said quietly. "They want us destroyed. Truth won't change that. Maybe not all of them, but some." Sarah felt the plan crystallizing. We show them the ledgers, show them Fair Hollow can work without slavery, plant a seed of doubt, make some of them wonder if they've been wrong. And the ones who still want violence. She looked at Dinah. We make sure they understand that violence here comes with a price. Dinah studied her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. All right, we'll prepare. Both kinds of preparation, the rational kind and the other kind, just in case. They worked through the night. Some cleaned and organized, making Fair Hollow look like a functional farm rather than a haunted plantation. Others, led by Dinah, prepared defenses of a different nature. Herbs and symbols and words in old languages, protections that might be superstition or might be something more. And Sarah sat in her uncle's office, now hers, writing down everything that had happened at Fair Hollow. The murders, yes, but also the reasons. The systematic cruelty, the rapes, the children sold, the bodies broken by labor designed to extract profit without regard for human cost. She wrote it all, creating a document that would justify Dinah's actions or condemn Sarah herself. She wasn't sure which. As dawn broke, painting Fair Hollow in shades of blood and gold, the mob appeared on the road. 40 men on horseback, carrying torches and weapons, faces set with righteous anger. At their head rode James Hendricks, his barn still a smoking ruin, his face twisted with rage. Sarah walked out to meet them alone, unarmed, carrying nothing but the document she'd written. Behind her, the people of Fair Hollow stood in a line, not hiding, not cowering, but present, witnessing. "Mr. Hendricks," Sarah called out, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. "Welcome to Fair Hollow. Would you like to come in and talk, or would you prefer to burn first and ask questions after?" Hendricks stared at her, clearly thrown by her calm. "You're harboring a witch. We've come to dispense justice. I'm harboring human beings, and if seeking their freedom makes me a witch, then I suppose I'm guilty." Sarah held up the document. "But before you dispense justice, perhaps you'd like to hear about the justice already dispensed here. About 6 men who died because they were cruel beyond measure. About the woman who killed them, yes, but also about why. About what Fair Hollow has really been all these years. We don't need to hear African lies. Then don't listen to them. Listen to me, a white woman, Charles Whitmore's niece, a member of your own society." Sarah's voice hardened. "Listen to me tell you about the rapes, the murders, the systematic destruction of human souls that this plantation was built on. Listen to me explain how Dinah's poison was no worse than the poison you all participate in every day when you treat people like property." Some of the men shifted uncomfortably. Not all of them, but some. "And then," Sarah continued, "I'll tell you about the alternative, about how Fair Hollow is going to work going forward, with wages instead of whips, with choice instead of chains, with people instead of property. It won't be as profitable, but it will be human." "That's economic suicide," someone in the mob called out. "You'll fail within a year, maybe, but I'd rather fail trying to be decent than succeed by being monstrous." Sarah looked directly at Hendricks. "Your barn burned. I'm sorry for that, but Fair Hollow didn't do it. We've been here trying to survive, trying to change. The curses and hauntings, I won't deny Dinah has power, but we've been using it defensively, not to attack." "Then who burned my barn?" Hendricks demanded. "I don't know. Someone else who's angry, someone else who's suffered, maybe someone on your own plantation who saw an opportunity." Sarah let that sit. "But I promise you this. Burn Fair Hollow, kill us all, and you won't stop the anger. You'll just prove that violence is the only language you understand, and violence has a way of answering itself." She held out the document she'd written. "Or you can read this, understand what happened here, and decide if the system that created Dinah's revenge is worth preserving." For a long moment no one moved. The mob waited, torches burning, weapons ready. Fair Hollow's people stood silent, watching, and Sarah simply stood there, arm extended, offering truth as a shield against violence. Finally, Hendricks dismounted, walked forward, took the document. He read in silence, his face going from red to pale to something else, something that might have been understanding or might just have been horror at seeing his world's ugliness written plain. When he finished, he looked up at Sarah with eyes that had gone hollow. If this is true, it's true, every word, then we're all damned. He turned to face the mob. Go home, all of you. There's nothing to burn here except our own shame. Not everyone listened. Some argued, still hungry for violence, still needing an enemy they could destroy to feel righteous, but enough listened. Enough turned their horses and rode away, leaving Fair Hollow standing in the morning light, scarred but unburned. As the last of the mob disappeared down the road, Samuel came to stand beside Sarah. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, or the craziest. Both, probably. Sarah's legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. But we're alive. Fair Hollow's alive. For now, Dinah said, joining them. But this isn't over, Miss Sarah. We bought time, not safety. The question is, what we do with it. Sarah looked at her, at Ruth, at all the faces of Fair Hollow. We prove it can work. We prove people can thrive without slavery. We become the alternative that scares them more than any curse. And if we fail, then at least we failed trying to be human. Sarah smiled wearily. The well taught me that much. Justice matters. But so does mercy. So does trying to build something better from the ruins of something evil. That afternoon, Sarah returned to the magistrate's office and demanded he certify the manumission papers. When he refused, she told him she had copies of Fair Hollow's ledgers and evidence of his own family's involvement in the most brutal aspects of the slave trade. She didn't threaten, didn't need to. The implication was clear. Approve the papers, or watch your own family's crimes become public knowledge. Pembroke signed the papers with shaking hands. By sunset, 47 people were legally free. Some chose to leave immediately, heading north with money Sarah had liquidated from Fair Hollow's assets. Others chose to stay, to work for wages, to help transform the plantation into something that had never existed before in South Carolina. A farm run by free labor, by choice, by partnership instead of ownership. It was fragile. It was imperfect. It would probably fail within a few years, crushed by economics or neighboring hostility or the sheer impossibility of maintaining an island of freedom in an ocean of bondage. But it was trying. And trying mattered. That night, Sarah stood at the well, looking down into its dark depths. The water had done its work, had shown her truth so terrible it felt like poison, had judged her and found her wanting, then given her a chance to change. Thank you, she whispered to the well, to Dinah's gods, to whatever power had moved through Fair Hollow's stones and soil. The water didn't answer. It was just water now, clean and clear and ordinary. The curse lifted, the debt paid, the justice dispensed. But Sarah would never forget what it had shown her, would carry that truth like the bone pendant Dinah had given her, a weight and a reminder that the ground remembers, the water remembers, and justice delayed is not justice denied, only justice waiting for the right hands to dispense it. 5 years passed, like water through stone, slow, persistent, carving new channels in impossible rock. Fair Hollow transformed from whispered scandal to grudging curiosity to something approaching acceptance. Not everywhere, not by everyone, but enough that it survived those first impossible years. Sarah stood in the office, now shared with Ruth and Samuel, who'd become the farm's co-managers, reviewing accounts that finally, after years of losses, showed modest profit. The transformation hadn't been easy. Converting from slave labor to wage work had required reimagining every aspect of the operation. Smaller crops, diverse plantings, profit-sharing that gave workers investment in Fair Hollow's success. They'd failed at cotton, failed at tobacco, finally found success in vegetable farming and small-scale grain production that sold to Charleston's free black community. It wasn't the fortune Charles Whitmore had dreamed of, but it was honest, and it worked. "Letter came from Philadelphia," Ruth said, entering with the mail, "from Thomas and his family." Sarah opened it eagerly. Thomas had been one of the first to leave Fair Hollow after emancipation, taking his family north to start fresh. His letters were a lifeline, proof that freedom could lead to flourishing. "Dear Miss Sarah," the letter began, and Sarah still smiled at the formality. "Business is good. We've saved enough to buy a small house in the Negro district. The children attend school 3 days a week. My wife has started a sewing business. We are not rich, but we are free, and that wealth cannot be measured in currency. I think often of Fair Hollow and wonder if you're still fighting the good fight. People here speak of that place like a legend, the cursed plantation that became something else, the witch who poisoned masters, and the white woman who helped her. The stories grow stranger in the telling, but the heart remains true. Something impossible happened there, something that proved alternatives exist to this terrible system we're all trapped in. Stay strong. You are doing holy work, whether the church recognizes it or not." Sarah folded the letter carefully, adding it to the box where she kept all correspondence from Fair Hollow's diaspora. 23 people had left in those first years. The other 24 had stayed, building lives here despite the danger, despite the discrimination, despite the constant pressure from neighboring plantations whose owners saw Fair Hollow as an existential threat. "Another delegation coming up the road," Samuel called from the window. "Looks official." Sarah's stomach clenched. Official delegations rarely brought good news. She moved to the window and saw a carriage bearing Charleston's city seal, accompanied by 2 riders. The magistrate's office, most likely, probably here to make trouble. But when the carriage door opened, it wasn't Pembroke who emerged. It was a younger man, perhaps 30, dressed in a northern style that immediately marked him as an outsider. He carried a leather satchel and had the earnest expression of someone with a mission. "Miss Whitmore?" He approached as Sarah descended to meet him. "My name is Jonathan Birch. I'm a journalist with the Pennsylvania Gazette. I've come to write about Fair Hollow." Sarah's first instinct was refusal. They'd survived by maintaining a low profile, being strange enough to be left alone but not so visible as to invite destruction. A newspaper article would end that protective obscurity. But then she thought of Thomas's letter. The stories grow stranger in the telling. Maybe it was time for the true story to be told. "Come inside, Mr. Birch. I'll make tea. Real tea, not well water, though that has its own story." And over the next 3 days, Jonathan Birch interviewed everyone at Fair Hollow who would speak with him. He toured the fields, examined the account books, ate meals in the communal dining hall they'd built where enslaved and free, those categories now obsolete at Fair Hollow, shared tables as equals. He was particularly interested in Dinah, who at nearly 70 now moved slowly, but still commanded respect that went beyond fear. "You killed 6 men, Birch said during their interview, his pencil poised over his notebook. "Do you regret it?" Dinah considered the question seriously. They sat in her cabin, walls covered with herbs and objects whose purposes Sarah had learned not to question. The bone pendant hung on the wall, its cracks now filled with silver, transformed into something beautiful rather than hidden. "I regret the world that made it necessary," Dinah said finally. "I regret that poison was the only power available to a woman with no rights, no protection, no recourse to law or justice. But do I regret stopping 6 men who brutalized everyone they touched? No, I don't. Some will call you a murderer. Some have been calling me that for years. Doesn't make me less right." Dinah smiled slightly. "Tell me, Mr. Birch, what do you call it when the law protects men who rape and murder, but condemns the woman who stops them? Justice? Because from where I stand looks more like evil with a gavel," Birch wrote furiously. "And, Miss Whitmore, how do you view her role in all this?" "Sarah?" Dinah's expression softened. "She drank the truth and didn't turn away. That's rarer than you'd think. Most white folks, they're presented with evidence of what slavery really is. The rape, the torture, the children sold, the humanity destroyed, and they find ways to look away. Tell themselves it's exaggerated or necessary, or somehow not their responsibility. Sarah looked straight at it and said no more, bankrupted herself, endangered herself, became a pariah in her own society. That's not salvation, but it's something. It's a start. On the final day of his visit, Birch asked to see the well. Sarah led him there, along with Ruth and Dinah. It looked ordinary now, just stone and water, bucket and rope. But Sarah could still feel its presence, the memory of what it had been, what it had shown her. "Is it true the water was poisoned?" Birch asked. "That you used herbs and curses to kill the masters?" "The water held truth," Dinah corrected. "Whether that's poison depends on who's drinking. For men with blood on their hands, yes, it was deadly. For someone seeking to understand, to really see what Fair Hollow had been." She looked at Sarah. "The water taught. Whether the teaching killed or transformed depended on the student." Birch scribbled notes, then paused. "May I drink from it? The well?" Everyone went still. Sarah felt a flutter of old fear. The water was clean now, had been for years, but some part of her still remembered its judgment, its terrible clarity. "Why would you want to?" Ruth asked. "Because I need to understand. For the article, I need to experience what Miss Whitmore experienced, what the masters experienced. I need to know if the water really does—" He gestured helplessly. "If it really does show truth." Dinah studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but understand. Truth isn't always kind, Mr. Birch. Sometimes truth shows you things about yourself you'd rather not see. Things about the world you've been participating in without really looking. You sure you want that?" Birch swallowed hard, but nodded. Dinah drew a bucket, the old ritual of rope and weight and water rising from depths. She filled a cup and handed it to him. "Drink deep," she said, "and don't lie to yourself about what you taste." Birch drank. Sarah watched his face, saw the exact moment the water hit, eyes widening, face paling, something fundamental shifting in his expression. He drank again, deeper, as if desperate to understand what he was experiencing. "It tastes," he struggled for words, "like metal and earth and something else, something that makes me think of—" He set down the cup with shaking hands. "I grew up in Pennsylvania. My father was an abolitionist, raised me to believe slavery was evil. But I've been writing for newspapers that accept advertisements for slave sales. I've eaten sugar picked by enslaved hands, worn cotton woven from enslaved labor. I've profited from the system while telling myself I was against it, and the water—" He looked at the well with something like awe or horror. "The water is showing me every compromise, every moment I looked away, every time I chose comfort over conscience." "That's what it showed me," Sarah said quietly. "That's what it showed all of us who had the courage to drink. Complicity. The ways we're all infected with the evil we claim to oppose." Birch sat heavily on the well's edge. "How do you live with it? Knowing?" "You do something," Ruth said simply. "You don't just know. You act. You change. You help build something different, even if it's imperfect, even if it fails. The water doesn't want guilt. It wants transformation." Birch's article appeared 6 weeks later in the Pennsylvania Gazette and was immediately reprinted in abolitionist papers across the North. "The Well of Justice, a Carolina Plantation's Transformation from Slavery to Freedom," ran with the subheading, "How Poison Became Medicine and a Slave Woman's Revenge Sparked Change." The response was immediate and divided. Northern abolitionists held Fair Hollow up as proof that slavery was economically unnecessary and morally indefensible. Southern planters denounced the article as lies and Northern propaganda. The debate raged in newspapers, churches, legislative halls. Fair Hollow received visitors, some genuine seekers, hoping to learn how to transition their own operations. Others, hostile critics looking for evidence of failure to justify their own practices. A few were journalists like Birch, hoping to capture lightning in a bottle, to write the story that would finally turn the tide against slavery. Through it all, Fair Hollow continued its work, planting and harvesting, paying wages, teaching reading in the evening school they'd established in the old plantation house, proving, one season at a time, that alternatives existed. Dinah grew frailer as the years passed. Her eyes, already clouded, finally failed completely, leaving her blind. But she still spent hours at the well, hands trailing in the water, lips moving in conversations Sarah couldn't hear. "Who are you talking to?" Sarah asked one evening, finding Dinah at her post. "The water remembers everyone who ever drank from it," Dinah said. "The masters, yes, but also the enslaved who drew it, the children who played near it, everyone who ever touched these stones." She smiled. "They're all still here, in a way. The water holds their stories. I'm just reminding it to tell them true." "Are you at peace?" Sarah asked. "With what you did?" Dinah was quiet for so long Sarah thought she hadn't heard. Then, "Peace isn't for people like me. Not in this life. I carry 7 deaths on my soul, and when I stand before whatever God there is, I'll have to answer for them. But I also carry the knowledge that I stopped 7 men who would have hurt hundreds more. I carry the freedom of the people who lived because those men died. That's not peace, but it's something I can live with." She turned her sightless eyes towards Sarah. "What about you? Are you at peace?" Sarah thought of all Fair Hollow had become, the school teaching children to read. The workers building lives of dignity instead of degradation, the small but growing network of farms trying to follow their model. The article that had sparked new debates about slavery's necessity. It wasn't enough, would never be enough to balance the scales of centuries of evil, but it was something. "No," Sarah admitted, "not peace, but purpose. And maybe that's better." Dinah died on a cold January morning, sitting by the well as if keeping watch. They found her at dawn, bucket still in hand, a slight smile on her weathered face. She was 73 years old and had been a slave for 59 of those years before Fair Hollow's transformation. They buried her beside the well, marking the grave with a stone carved with symbols from her bone pendant. At the funeral, people came from all over the county, black and white, enslaved and free, people whose lives she'd touched or saved or changed. Samuel spoke about her courage, Ruth about her wisdom, Sarah about the terrible gift of truth she'd given, the poisoned water that had somehow become medicine. After the funeral, Sarah stood alone at the grave, at the well, thinking about justice and mercy and the long, slow work of transformation. "The ground remembers," she whispered, echoing Dinah's words from years ago. "The water remembers. And so will I." She drew a bucket of water, crystal clear and cold, tasting only of earth and minerals and memory. She drank deeply, letting it fill her, letting it remind her of the work still undone, the systems still in place, the evil still flourishing across the south. Fair Hollow was an island, one small island of freedom in an ocean of bondage. It wasn't enough, but it was proof that alternatives existed, that transformation was possible, that the terrible machinery of slavery could be dismantled, piece by piece, plantation by plantation, soul by soul. In the years that followed, Fair Hollow became something unexpected, not just a farm, but a symbol, a place people pointed to when they argued slavery was unnecessary, a story told when hope seemed impossible. The legend of the well, of Dinah's revenge, of the white woman who helped her, spread and evolved, becoming myth even while the place itself remained stubbornly, persistently real. Some of the neighboring plantations began making small changes, fewer whippings, better food, acknowledgement that enslaved people were human. Not emancipation, not freedom, but cracks in the edifice, tiny fissures that might, over time, widen into something like justice. It wasn't the revolution Dinah might have wanted, but it was movement. Sarah ran Fair Hollow until she was 63 years old, finally turning management over to Samuel and Ruth's children, who'd been born free and grown up knowing no other system. By then, the Civil War had come and gone, leaving slavery legally dead, even as its ghost haunted the South. Before she died, Sarah returned to the well one final time. It looked the same as always: stone and water, bucket and rope, ordinary and eternal. She touched the carved symbols on Dinah's gravestone, feeling the weight of years and changes and work still undone. "We tried," she said to the ghost of the woman who taught her to see. "We didn't succeed, not completely, but we tried, and maybe that matters." The water reflected sky and clouds, smooth as glass, keeping its secrets and its memories. Somewhere in its depths, Sarah thought she saw shapes, 7 faces looking up through the water, no longer drowning but at rest. And beside them, clear as daylight, Dinah's reflection, smiling with something that might have been approval, or might just have been understanding. The ground remembers, the water remembers, and remembering sometimes is the first step toward healing. Fair Hollow stands today, not as a working farm, but as a historical site, a museum dedicated to telling the truth about slavery and the complicated, imperfect story of one place's transformation. Visitors can still see the well, though they can no longer draw water from it. They can read Sarah's journals, study the manumission papers, walk through the quarters where enslaved people lived and the school where freed people learned. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind is right, tour guides will tell you they hear things near the well. Voices speaking in languages with no names, songs of mourning and rage and something that might be joy. The sound of a bucket being drawn, slow and rhythmic, bringing up water that tastes of truth and memory, and the long, slow work of justice dispensed one cup at a time. The ground remembers, the water remembers, and Fair Hollow, cursed and redeemed and transformed, remembers best of all, a testament to the terrible power of truth, the complicated work of change, and the possibility that even from poisoned ground, something like mercy might grow.